Hi everyone, how are you today? Good, okay, excellent. I'm Gareth Parry and I'm an accountant. I'm not really an accountant, I'm just kidding. I'm actually an experience designer. More about that in a minute. Firstly, thanks for having me here at this UX picnic. It's a lovely day outside, as you can see behind us. So look at the mountains, aren't they beautiful? And the beach on that side. It's lovely, isn't it? You guys can do that, eh?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Excellent. Excellent. Okay, so I'm not an accountant like I said I was. I'm an experience designer. And I work for a company called PWC Digital. So I'm going to tell you about a pretty well-known little digital human-centered experience agency called Optimal Experience. And their journey merging in with PricewaterhouseCoopers, a really big management consulting firm. So I've got a few things I want to share that are really awesome about that transition. A few things that are maybe a bit more of a work in progress, shall we say. And then I've got a few tips for you too. So let's see how we go. Firstly, it's probably worthwhile, before I get stuck in, just sort of explaining the sort of thing that an experience design team do. I mean, you guys probably know what an experience design team do. But really, it's about fixing bad experiences and designing really good experiences. So they're the experiences that people have when they interact with things like, I don't know, a Canon 70D camera, for example, or a physical space, or a service. So each of those things, if you're interacting with them, you are going to have an experience. I don't know about you, but there seem to be quite a few bad experiences in life, which means there's lots of work for us to do. One of my favourite quotes actually from a client is, I used my welcome letter to start a fire. So we pulled that out of some interviews with some customers of this particular client. It's just a great example of an experience welcoming you to their service that should be delightful, that's actually absolutely appalling. And it's causing people to go, do I really need or want this? And then disappear. So that's the kind of thing that we end up helping out with. Okay, so probably the first question on your minds is why? Why would a boutique, successful, human-centered experience design agency merge with a management consulting firm, other than to get a shorter kind of descriptor for what they do? Well, how about I tell you about it? So for years, we'd struggled to reach decision makers. We did a lot of work helping our clients to get things like their registration process or their shopping cart really humming. When actually the conversation that needed to be had was more about the way they incentivise their sales staff, or some disruption that was coming out of left field that they really needed to think about and preempt, or even how their supply chain or how their value chain works. So that inability for us to have those conversations with our clients and focusing on the stuff that really mattered, that really frustrated our team of experience designers quite a lot, particularly given what we believe about experiences. And that is that organisations that win do so because of their experience. It's really differentiated from other people's experience. Okay, so we weren't getting that message through to exec teams and to boards. Turns out that PwC has some really good relationships with exec teams and boards, and we figured maybe that makes sense that we join up. The second thing that our team got quite frustrated about is creating something following a human-centered process, only to have that something fall by the wayside of budget or timeframes or status quo or politics. And the good thing about PwC is they've got some really great change managers and implementation experts. We figured that might be useful for us too. So we joined the firm in about July 2014. Well, it was actually exactly July 2014. And we were aiming to change the conversation to the topics that really did matter, and to hold those conversations with people who could cause change, and then to see that change through into reality. So that's the why. Okay, a couple of things that have been really awesome. When we joined the firm, we had about 20 really awesome Optimillions. Now there's about 50 of us, so we've grown rapidly in a short period of time. But we actually join a team of about 200 in the consulting practice in New Zealand, about 1,300 people in New Zealand, 2,600 digital people from around the world, and then 200,000 employees from around the world. That's quite a big change from 20 to 200,000. The awesome thing about that change is those people are, on the whole and as individuals, really quite awesome people. They're fun-loving too, they work hard, they're very, very capable at what they do. They have some great skill sets that are really complementary to what we do, and just skill sets that we didn't have. I think there are behavioural economists, CFOs, actuaries, auditors, supply chain experts, basically you name a specialty, we have that in that wider family. And being able to knock on the door and get the inside goss on what regulation is coming to a particular industry in New Zealand and what are the levers and measures that are able to be pulled within that industry, it's just second to none to have that access. It's also much easier to tackle big projects when you've got 1,300 people rather than 20. And it's a much more efficient sales team when you've got 1,300 people rather than 20. The second thing that was really quite awesome about that transition was space. So we had some pretty colourful, eclectic offices in Auckland and Wellington about 18 months ago, full of sombreros and onesies and butt bubbler machines, just the sort of thing you'd expect to have in a creative design agency office. When we first had a look at the firm's offices, they were sort of a shag pile green carpet with suspended ceilings and partitions. It wasn't really a space conducive to designing experiences from. So we talked about that and decided that it made sense that we go through and reinvent that space, reimagine it. So we had a really good human-centred collab with the National Property Manager, with our team, and with the architect from Jasmax, a guy called Parry, good bloke. And we came out with something really quite special. As a space, it's completely different. Those ceilings are gone, the floors are polished concrete, the tables are up here and down here. The room is full of Macs, there's graffiti on the walls. It's a very cool space. In fact, it's so cool that other people from within the firm bring their customers and their friends and their family in pretty much every day for a tour of how awesome the firm is. So I quite like that. I think it's quite a nice little success. The National Property Manager, in fact, had this great quote. She said, "What you've done here is really awesome. It's really opened minds, as well as doors," which I thought was quite a nice pun from her, very clever. Okay, that brings us to our work. So we're really still focused, or still working with the organisations we've always worked for, but we're also working for a few more besides. We're doing some work internally, but we're primarily helping New Zealand organisations to create really great experiences. We're continuing to help with those shopping carts and registration flows, but we're also helping to formulate disruptive strategies for organisations, or look at their operating model, or even tackling complex, dynamic, multi-agency problems in situation labs. Really some quite exhilarating stuff. It feels much more like the conversations that we wanted to be having before we joined the firm. Okay, probably the final thing on the awesomeness list is the significant proliferation of lolcats. So distributed via Lotus Notes, and we'll talk about that in a minute, perhaps in the work in progress category. But in any case, the production and distribution has increased markedly since we've been on board in the firm, and I think that's quite neat. So tick so far. Okay, so on to some things that are maybe a bit more of a work in progress. So I don't know if you've heard of the Kubler-Ross change curve. Is that familiar to you guys? Let me just take you through it very quickly. It's about 50 years old. It describes the emotional stages that people go through when something close to them ends. So it starts with some denial, then anger, and then sort of bargaining, and then depression, and then acceptance eventually. So we absolutely experienced that change curve in joining the firm. Despite the awesomeness of new colleagues, new digs, new projects, and plenty of lolcats, the differences between that small agency and a large consulting firm really quite marked, or marked, I believe is the correct pronunciation. So at one time or another, over that first 6 months, we each experienced some shock, denial, frustration, anger, whether over the extra paperwork or systems or the policies or structures or the language we were using. Okay, so let's just traverse some of those in brief, shall we? Did anyone see the PWC Digital launch campaign? Did you see it? You did? Oh, you didn't? Oh, okay, you may have seen it. Anyway, ran at airports, billboards around town, in national papers, takeovers online. We could never have hoped to do something like that when we were working as a smaller firm. But as part of a really large firm, we had access to this great suite of marketing and advertising tools. And you might be thinking, why am I talking about that in work in progress? Well, I'm talking about brand here. So it's been quite hard to transition away from optimal experience. That brand had a lot of currency amongst our team and amongst the New Zealand marketplace. And PWC Digital is very much not Optimal Experience 3.0. It is a new entity. Optimal Experience is gone. We probably didn't celebrate that enough, and we probably didn't mourn that enough. And I think both of those two things are quite powerful lessons for us. It meant that we lived a lot of the early days of the merger living in the past and really not appreciating and enjoying the present and what was, and this really quite neat coming together. So PWC Digital is the best parts of what made Optimal Experience, and what makes PWC, PWC. But it is a different thing. So awesome, but the process of getting there has been quite hard. Culture. So culture, that's kind of what we believe and how we behave, how we interact with each other. And that's always been very important to Optimillions. Culture is made up of things like inter-office Christmas parties or pie days, for example, where you all buy pies and eat them together. Pie day. Or blue check shirt day, where you all turn up wearing blue check shirts. Interestingly enough, what you'll notice when you go into a PwC firm is there is a uniform. Blue shirts, blue suits. It's pretty much everywhere. So the blue check shirt was a bit tongue-in-cheek of us, I must admit. One thing that really has changed, though, is coloured socks. So next time you meet someone from PwC, just check out their socks. Expert tip. In any case, we came into PwC subscribing to Dan Pink's Drive philosophy. Well worth a look up if you haven't encountered that before. Basically, Dan Pink's Drive philosophy says that people are motivated when they have autonomy over their work. They have opportunities to master their skills, and they can connect their own personal purpose with an organisational purpose. Now, it turns out that PwC believes exactly the same stuff, just probably not as early to that belief, and perhaps hasn't practiced that in the same way as the Optimal Experience team had, but a really good solid base to build from. The reason I'm putting culture in as a work in progress is it always is. So every time you add a new person to the team, that team's culture subtly changes. When you insert 20 people into a consulting team of 200, that has quite a big shift quite quickly. Okay, a couple more things before we get into tips. So what our work looks like is post-it notes, drawing, standing, working with people, quite collaborative, quite interactive. Whereas what the firm's work looks like is typically people shaking hands with each other, with briefcases. No, I'm kidding, it doesn't look like that at all. It actually, the way the firm works, looks very similar to the way we've always worked. The part about it that's a work in progress, though, is the order that things are done in is sometimes a little different. The language that gets used sometimes needs a bit of translation. When you say persona, do you mean what I mean when I say persona, or user story, or storyboard, or insight? So that translation process has taken some time for us to work our way through. Okay, tips. I've just got 4 or 5 that I'll go through very quickly. So the first tip is embrace change. Change is, of course, the only constant. The second tip, the second thing that we've really learned is that everybody, and I mean everybody, loves Post-it notes, right? I mean, hey, you love Post-it notes, right? Do you love Post-it notes? Yeah. Do you love warm-up activities? I'll bet you do, yeah. Everybody loves warm-up activities. So we've found that accountants, lawyers, engineers, farmers, consumers, all of them love engaging with these processes. So embrace them, go for it. Next tip, desirability has two friends, viability and feasibility. So as experienced designers, we're really great at figuring out desirability. But you know what? Economists are really great at figuring out viability, and technologists are really great at figuring out feasibility. It's wonderful having all of those people together in the same room. Know what I'm saying? Next tip, second to last, drinking from a fire hydrant requires a delicate touch. Now that might need some explaining. Again, we talked about 1,300 people in a sales team for a team of 20 delivering services. So you can imagine the amount of new, interesting, exciting stuff that we've got in front of us to deal with. There are a few other ways that I've been thinking about this. There's pick your battles, might be a slightly different meaning. There's also forgiveness, not permission. That probably also is a slightly different point. That, by the way, only lasts for 6 months. Or the minute you have to defend yourself, you've lost the argument. Anyway, I'll let you hold the tension of those things and try and decipher some meaning from it. The last thing is be yourself. Different is awesome. That's all we've got time for today at this UX picnic. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope that cup of tea hasn't gone cold. Thanks.